Animesh, can you speak? Just a voice.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, good. No, I can hear you. Yeah, I was a bit late, probably a minute or two.
Is this like this Ramanujan College? Is it like I sort of didn't understand the background about these sessions. Uh, like you're doing it on like proper public conference, or it's a private group of people, or
So it's for faculties in India. For example, this is like a training course for faculties across India. So it's a private in the sense that only our faculty members and research scholars can join.
okay,
So it's a scheme from Ministry of Education for Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya Vision for Teachers and Teaching. So this is like teaching teachers regarding new stuff so that they can train better and so that they can deliver same to their students as well.
makes sense. Yeah, that's good.
While Vipin connects, so what happens is that's why live gets streamed into YouTube and something like they bring it out after the event. They put it out. That's one way. So the first one was done by me. Second one by Ganesh Hiragoda VMware. This is third one we had missed today morning. Something happened to Brian. He couldn't come, and this is fourth one. And prior to that, there was one initial one where ministry. There is the inaugural session where Nita Verma, the National Informatics Center, who managed the entire data centers of all the India, with around 5 or 6 regional and some 30, 28 to 30 state and union territories. They have each data center. All this is managed, including Aadhaar and including all this contact tracing. And so they are quite advanced. We won't know what they are doing, but they are doing something really fantastic. And we look forward to that's why you are here, because you are one of the primary guys who will help us in making the AI ML as you go. You are also not going to be static at this place. As you move up, you'll have more chance to influence. And so we want that somebody from India who we can trust and who can deliver on the ability for us to adopt technology. So
Okay, so
that's the
as we are
context.
live now, so I think we can start and then we can continue later. Yeah. So welcome everyone to this live session of 2-week refresher course in computer science on next generation technologies, sponsored by Ministry of Education. We have Animesh Singh with us. Animesh is IBM Distinguished Engineer and CTO, Watson Data and AI OSS Strategies. First of all, thanks Animesh for accepting our invitation and for your lecture on trusted, ethical, and scalable AI using open source. So on this note, I request Animesh to take over and I request the participants to post their questions in the YouTube chat box. So we have first question, Animesh, regarding does ethics drive policy or policy drive ethics for AI?
Um, Very good question. I think it's depending on the stage of the life cycle you are in, right? It can be either way, right? I mean, in a lot of cases, right? Obviously, you count on the private bodies, the private organizations, the actual individuals, right, who are building these AI systems, right, to actually be conscious that there is great power which we are giving to these AI models. They're making life-changing decisions for people in terms of denying your loan, getting you in a university, suggesting your next treatment, uh, all life-changing decisions, and as part of that power, right, that there comes a great responsibility. Now, in a lot of cases, you'll see, that it's also the organizational culture. It's up to certain individuals who are building those pieces of software, right, where essentially, they start taking early leads, right, without having a policy or a regulation, um, to start making sure right from the beginning what they're building is cannot be used for harmful purposes. But uh, in a lot of cases, like, we mostly, the world is, more and more capitalistic, and living in a capitalist society. So sometimes, profits and timelines override, ethics in that case, right? You think of them as nice to have instead of a must have, right? And that's where policy comes into picture, because policy stops you and says, hey, no, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have, and you've got to follow these laws and rules and regulations. Otherwise, you cannot deploy these AI systems, you cannot monetarily benefit. And I think that's where you see, European Union in general has always been the flag bearer of some of these laws and regulations. Now, when you look at us in IBM, right, IBM Research started investing in this field almost like 5 years ago. The first test set of toolkits, and I'm talking about code, not like research papers, right? The first set of toolkits, the code, etc. Like sort of initiated 5 years ago. We had our first project in open source around 2.5, 3 years ago around adversarial robustness. Then we open sourced a project around fairness, detection and mitigation. Now, until that time, if you looked at the larger industry, the industry was still thinking of it, okay, these are nice to have things, fairness, bias. I mean, does it really matter? But it's 2017 onwards, like when this thing suddenly exploded. And now, if you see, European Union has proposed, laws and regulations, just like, they came up with GDPR, which was around, how to handle your data privacy and regulations. There is a proposed regulations coming around AI, which are essentially, mandating some of these things, which is around, your model shall not be vulnerable to adversarial attacks. Thou shall not be able to, your models, when deployed in production, should not have bias against a particular race, gender, different status of the class of the society. And if there is, right, you should have mitigation algorithms in place. Plus, you should have very well documented explanation, provenance, lineage tracking, so that, if somebody wants to go back and check if a model made a decision, why it made the decision, what was the data set it was trained on, all that can be done. Right. So now the policy is coming, but a lot of that work, right, for companies which are, and individuals and organizations which are more ethically oriented, or wanted to build responsible AI, they started doing it before. Now, if you look at the domain itself, a lot of the concepts, etc., for example, a lot of the things which we did in IBM Research around fairness has now made it into academia. A lot of the universities in America are now teaching and using AI Fairness 360 as a course, right? So a lot of those concepts, if you start looking at European Union regulation, they actually have made it there, right? Similarly, around adversarial robustness, it has been used by DARPA here, right, which is a defense agency. So in a sense, like, the expertise of that domain definitely, gets feeded when the policies are drafted, because, that's how they see, okay, there are certain technologies, research papers, and that's how the policy depth comes in. But definitely, by virtue of having a policy, when you make it mandatory, that's when, everyone starts thinking, okay, it's now a must have and not a nice to have, and that drives their adoption. It's a long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully,
Yeah. Thanks, Animesh. With this, we have second question on how do you relate trust and security with AI? This is again, this is a very interesting one, but other one is AI fairness, expandability 360 are there in feedback repositories errors. So don't know. Let me read out complete question. Okay. So this is like a little bit complete. What is the role of policy framing on data bias like gender, diversity, error in models, etc.?
So as I was mentioning, I think probably, so the first question you had, like, in that context, was the role of trust and security, right? So I mean, so the session was around, what we call within IBM trusted AI. If you look at the general industry word, sometimes you will hear responsible AI, you will hear ethical AI, right? So all these technologies are around that, right? Now, if you saw the session, right, security, which we in our session handle through a toolkit called Adversarial Robustness Toolbox, which, as I mentioned, is being used by U.S. defense agencies like DARPA, plus being used around figuring out vulnerability in models, right? And there are a lot of other universities, who are actually contributing and using that particular toolkit, right? Which we call Adversarial Robustness Toolbox, or in short, ART. Like, so apart from the organizations like Microsoft is actually using it, General Motors company is using it. But as I was talking about the academia, right? Not there is the AGH University of Science and Technology, there is the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, there is Kyushu University. So a lot of the universities are also using besides like the defense organizations or private enterprises, right? And it's sort of is because if you follow the last year and a half, you have seen, all of a sudden, the security and the cyber attacks are on the rise, right? And what we have seen in the context of AI, right? A, the awareness of risk is low. B, there is a lower understanding of, how to secure AI models. And B, the security, and C, the security posture is almost close to zero, right? Now, if you also look at analysts like Gartner, etc., right? They are now highlighting this in the analyst papers, right? Like that machine learning itself presents this new attack surface and increases security risks, right? And so our toolkit, Adversarial Robustness Toolbox, right, essentially plays in that space. In fact, it's the most popular toolkit out of the toolkits which we have launched in the trusted AI space, right? What was the second question about?
Yeah, before we move to the next question, in this Animesh, about the ART, does it handle something like a SaaS or something they call it, like secured access services at the edge? That is what the Cisco is pushing in. And so what it means is like ransomware, cyber attacks, utility attacks, and can these all be handled as part of the ART, or what is?
No, so like what you're talking is in general, the field of security, right? Ransomware attacks. How do you secure your edge devices, edge networks? Like when you go specifically in the field of AI, right? ART,
Yeah.
Robust Toolbox, is essentially preventing attacks which can be done on models, right? So essentially, you can fool models, right? So again, I mean, if you dive into the session, like there are certain examples which I gave around, for example, in financial systems, if a model, when you are depositing a check through your phone, and if a model is making a decision, it is very easy to fool that model by creating an adversarially generated image of that check, so that, when you are saying, for example, deposit $161,000, it can make and fool the model to think that that one is a four. So, it could become $464,000, right, which are being debited from the person who wrote the check, right? So these kind of attacks where you can adversarially impact the input being fed to deployed models, or you get backdoor entry into the training data and use that training backdoor later on to fool the models. Similarly, if you are looking at the field of self-driving cars, right, for example, there it can be lethal because in a lot of cases, for example, in US we have these stop signs, right, and a self-driving vehicle has to stop at that particular stop sign, right? But if the data set on which it was trained, those images, they were either intentionally adversarially modified, or because of the wear and tear, right, the input images on which the model is trained on, right, it learns different things, then it's going to predict a stop sign is not a stop sign, and the vehicle is going to drive over. Similarly, it probably cannot see pedestrians, right? So this toolkit is specifically in that space where how you can generate and perturb inputs and generate adversarial inputs and fool a model to give a prediction which it was not supposed to give, right? And that's essentially the field in which Adversarial Robustness Toolbox operates. So it gives you a lot of attack methods which you can run to test whether your model is vulnerable to adversarial attacks. And if it is found to be vulnerable to adversarial attacks, then it gives you a lot of defense algorithms which you can implement so as to make sure the model is robust and so on.
Got it. So we can do both. So the second question which Vipin had earlier asked was related to AI fairness and AI explainability. So AAF and AAE 360, what you called. Can they be put in a closed loop like thing to reduce the error?
I'm sorry, can they be put in what?
A closed loop system like thing, so that when you try to explain, like in SQL, we try to explain, okay, this is why it is going slow. So in this case, we are trying to explain that this is why the fairness is not there, right? Are you getting? So you have the fairness on one side, and you have the explainability on the other side, and both are for AI 360. That means you go through 360 around, try to find out what is fairness, and you try to find out what is the explainability of it. Can we improve the explainability if the fairness? If can we have a degree of measure of fairness which can be 100%, and so that explainability goes more towards 100% accuracy? Can they be put in a closed loop type of thing, or is it something I'm just dreaming?
So I'm trying to understand when you say closed loop, it's like, can it be automated?
Yeah, kind of. To improve the fairness itself. Explainability, we give some explanation, hey, you got it because you are black, let's say. You didn't get the admission. Now, can we make that, know that the explainability is saying this something which we can improve by saying, no, by doing this, I'll improve it. So model can be improved, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like so like again, I mean, with all these toolkits, right? There are algorithms to detect anomalies, detect problems, but there are algorithms to fix problems, right? So I gave and I talked extensively about Qflow pipelines, for example, in my session, right, which essentially allows you to run machine learning pipelines and create these loops where you can, essentially finally when you have so for example something like fairness, right, you can have it in different phases of the life cycle, while you are training a model, or once you have deployed a model and it's a black box model, you're making predictions, right? It has algorithms to detect whether the model predictions, the individual predictions or predictions over a period of time, are biased towards a particular gender, particular race, particular religion, right? So, and I gave the examples, right? For example, the compass system, which was found to be twice the rate biased towards the non-Caucasian or black people. So then like having them into an automated system like Qflow pipelines, right? So I talked that we have created automated components where you can then feed them in a sense like for example, you train your models, and while after training you are running validation on that trained model, and if you find it to be biased, you can go ahead and use some algorithms from AI Fairness 360, for example, reweigh or the data set, so that if for example people of color are there are more samples of that folks in the data set, then reweigh while using training, give them a lower weight, right, and then rerun the training, right? So you can automate and feedback all this in loop even when the model is deployed. Then you have I talked about KF serving, right, which provides what we call payload logging, which essentially captures all the requests and responses from the models over a period of time. And then you can use these toolkits to run analysis, to find bias, to find whether the model is vulnerable to adversarial attacks, to find drifts, to find anomaly. And if you find them, then you can have those pipelines take actions, go back and run different mitigation algorithms, retrain, redeploy, right? So it can all be put in an automated loop. There is another project which we didn't which I didn't bring up today, right? In general, because the material was so big in any case. I believe I had 100 slides or so, right? But that is called iterate, which essentially is around that, it monitors deployed models for different metrics, right? And progressively, it makes decisions. So for example, you have model deployed and then you want to launch a new canary version of that model. And you say, okay, give 5% traffic to my new model. And then, it monitors all these metrics, bias, drift, anomaly. Based on that, it decides whether now bump 5% traffic to 10%, keeps on monitoring. If the criteria is passing, then, makes your canary version the default model. or rolls it back, right? So there are different techniques, right? So hopefully, that answers the question.
I think that's very interesting answer, Anmesh. A very important question, I think, from one participant. What is the main role of OSS in AI? And I want to answer, I want you to answer in terms of what do you also, I want to add one more stuff, what do you think, what are the roles of big foundations, for example, LFAI, and how you think that other communities, for example, whether it's from academia or whether it's from companies like IBM, how everyone can collaborate together in this kind of OSS environment, and how they can also contribute to this?
Great question, right? So I think in general, there was a slide which I had in my talk, which talks about the Linux Foundation AI landscape, right? Which gives and maybe can they see my screen right now? Oh, so the screen sharing is disabled, right? So I'll ping the link.
Let me share my. Okay, now you can share your screen.
Okay. So if you see, if you go to landscape.lfai.foundation, you'll see this, host of OSS projects, right, in different areas of AI, right? Almost any domain in AI you can think of, right, there is an OSS project corresponding. Now you can look at different projects, right? And for example, machine learning, reinforcement learning, programming, model, computing and management, interface, security and privacy, natural language processing. So you can see projects in all these different areas, right, which are there and which you can use. And you can essentially, for example, if you see explainability here, right, trusted and responsible AI, right? So that was a part of the session today. So you see, apart from the projects I mentioned, which are highlighted because they are now part of the landscape, but you can, click on this card. It gives you more details about that particular project. You can actually launch on the GitHub. You can look at, the different contributions, etc. Right? So all the information you need, right? All the way, going to the GitHub, looking at that particular project, etc. Right? That's all there. So I would strongly encourage you, to essentially bookmark this page, like landscape.lfai.foundation, and that's essentially the role we see with the foundations, right? I mean, we are a premier member of Linux Foundation AI and Data. We work closely with them, and when we came out with these projects, which you are seeing here, explainability 360, or universal robustness, AI fairness, we essentially donated it to Linux Foundation AI and Data because we firmly believe that there is no good which is going to come out of IBM retaining controlling rights over these projects, right? I mean, they need to be in a neutral place with the foundation owning the trademark and the rights and the licenses, everything, right? So the projects are now a neutral entity, right? And apart from us being, driving and contributing, right, we don't have any ownership rights on these projects, and that's great, and that's what the role the foundations play. Right now, we run Linux Foundation AI Trusted AI Committee, which is a monthly meeting where all these different vendors, the likes of Microsoft, General Motors, folks from DARPA, Troj AI, all the participating companies in this particular space come and talk about what they are doing, whether it's in terms of defining principles, what is their definition of trusted and ethical AI, or how they are using the toolkits from Linux Foundation AI and Data, and what they are building on top, and what are their use cases. So that's something I would strongly encourage for folks who are interested in joining to join. And if you do need information on how to join the Linux Foundation AI Trusted AI Committee, definitely reach out to me. The another project which I talked about, right, which is around the Qflow pipelines and KF serving, where a lot of these integration of these trusted AI projects are happening. That also has a weekly community meeting, essentially. And if you do need to know how to participate in that, definitely send an email to me, and I'll get you all incorporated. And there are different meetings like this, right? But essentially the foundations are supposed to be that the neutral entity where you are collaborating, coming together, and working towards making a good project better, and a better project a great project. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with this. Like, this is really important nowadays to contribute to like in these foundations, so that for academia as well, it's easy to go in and do some research over it. Uh, my next question is, how early should students be exposed to ethical considerations in AI ML? So this is
As
again very
early as possible. As early as possible, right? Because I think the foundations of the next generation AI systems are being laid down today, right? Probably what gets baked into some of these models, and we all know how government and legacy agencies work, right? If you deploy a software, it's hard to shake it up for the next 4 to 5 years. So if bias is getting encoded and coded into these AI systems and they're getting deployed today, they will be affecting your next set of generations for the next 5 years, maybe 10 years, without getting an update and upgrade. You might not have a chance. So I think making the strata of the students very much aware of the concerns and the importance and the relevance of trusted AI, and then educating them how to check at every single step while they are creating AI systems, and how to incorporate these trusted AI techniques using the toolkits, and then how to build is really important. In fact, a majority of our within IBM, majority of the work we have done around trusted AI, we started like 3 years ago. A large part of that was with universities here, right, in US, and that's where I say, like, these toolkits are being used in multiple of US universities at this time in courses, and a lot of the universities have actually started dedicated courses around trusted and ethical AI, where they are incorporating chapters based on these. So yeah.
yeah.
So
And
one question in between. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry, you were.
please go ahead, Prakash, please.
Yeah, no, no. I was just trying to do on the acceleration part of it, because scaling and acceleration, two aspects. What is the role of hardware, especially? Is it high performance computing that's absolutely essential, or do you see a simple accelerator like what are being proposed should suffice? What is your thinking on the hardware versus software for the acceleration, for the speeding up of the
I think
algorithms?
um, for the most part, like, obviously, large number of deep learning models, or neural networks, right? When you're running, I mean, distributed training is one of those things, right, which you really want to accelerate. You don't want, and we are not living in a world where we can live with that 2 months training time, which used to be the case 2.5 years, 3 years ago, or even some like last year, right? So to be able to speed up, because many and many more models are being produced, and they need to be deployed, and they need to be trained on a repeated fashion, right? So the scalability and speed up need is there. Now, how do you actually bring it up, right? So hardware has one aspect of it, right? So GPUs, right, from NVIDIA, TPUs from Google, right? All specialized hardware is welcome, and that's great, right? But like, if you look at the normal world, right, I mean, people have device techniques, right, which essentially, uh, you don't necessarily, if you don't have GPUs or TPUs, these expensive machines, you can then leverage large forms of cluster, the commodity hardware, right? And that's where, hence, the relevance of cloud in terms of scaling these things, right? So for example, majority of the platforms and machine learning platforms in the industry are now being built for Kubernetes, because the concept of running for something like distributed training, being able to spread out training across multiple of these containers, which can be launched on multiple machines, right? It lends very nicely to Kubernetes, and it's a very useful use case for AI, right? So you can handle that part totally through software, right? I mean, with Kubernetes, managing multiple host machines, which are spread across different machines, or even across different data centers, and then using that and launching distributed training. Or, like, if you have very powerful machines, that's almost going to guarantee you much better returns. In fact, when you're deploying your models in production, that's when the accelerators become really important, right? Because training, you can span out across multiple of these machines, get done faster. But now when you're running your models in production, right, you essentially want them to be closer to the hardware, right, where you have access to the GPUs. If your model, something like BERT, for example, is very, very resource hungry. And for that model to perform at a speed at which it needs to perform, right, it needs to live very closer to the GPU accelerators, right, so it's able to give the performance in that case. So I would say, for majority of the AI lifecycle, you can get really good work done using just the software combination. But when it actually your models are ready and you're deploying it in production, that's where having hardware accelerators really helps. And a majority of these production model deployments are essentially going on hardware accelerators. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why Qflow is so important nowadays, to work on these automations as well. So again, this is the role of foundations and companies, companies like IBM to donate such codes to these foundations and get into these things. So I have a one more question, that how bias can be improved on real time data.
Um, so, I mean, this could be a very long answer and a very short answer. I'll give you a short answer, right? Very simple example. You make a prediction to a model, right? And the prediction is, somebody requesting a loan, right? So you send, hey, John needs a loan, and John is a male, and this is his income. And you send a request to a model, and the model responses back, okay, approve, right? Or let's say, if you want to, maybe, it should have been, okay, you can just flip. For example, let's say, instead of John, initially you sent a request for, let's say, Mary is a female, right? Exact same things, right? So the same income, same job level, same numbers of experience, right? And same credit history, but Mary gets a denial, right? So that's the case. Like, so for example, if a request has come for what we call, protected attributes. So in the case of gender, it's probably the bias is more often than not, is going to be, towards females. Then, when you're looking at race, you can determine. So for example, if you send a request for a female and the model says, yes, the loan is denied, in real time, you can flip and keep everything same and just change the gender to male and see if the model is giving the same prediction. Now, if the model is giving the same prediction by just flipping the gender to male, then okay, this is a valid response from a model. But if the model prediction changes because, hey, I flipped the gender from female to male, that means the model is biased on that particular criteria, right? So this is something you can do in real time. In fact, we do in real time in a product called Watson OpenScale. That is the main algorithm which we use, where someone needs in real time whether the prediction which the model gave was biased or not, right?
Yeah, thanks, Animesh. And one question from my side, that we have in our college as well, School of Ethics, right? But now after this lecture, I think we should introduce ethics of AI as well in our school, right? So that's really interesting. And thanks, Animesh. Prakash, do you have more questions?
Yeah, maybe I can end up with the last question. KF serving and MLOps, they are very, very active, I believe. I have gone through most of the MLOps and evaluated. So I want to know, what is your thinking on that? Does that improve the ability to use uh, Kubeflow, or is it automation so that we can do much faster work just by having some kind of a bit added to it, like MLOps?
Like,
So, mhm,
I mean, Qflow is a project in the MLOps space,
mhm,
right? So the notion of MLOps is like similar to what you saw with DevOps. So what happened with DevOps was, if you remember, like, go back 10 years, 15 years ago, as a developer, I remember, working in enterprises. As a developer, when you developed an app, you say, hey, you throw it over the wall to the guys to deploy, You deploy it, you configure security, you do everything else. I'm a developer, I've developed the app, my job is done. Now, fast forward, like as the advent of cloud computing came in, right, and with platforms like Cloud Foundry, etc., you were not only expected to develop, you were expected to deploy in a staging environment, test it and see how it can work in a production like environment, configure some security. And that's where similarly on the ops side, the expectation was that they would know something about the app. If something goes wrong, they should be able to tweak the settings. So both dev and ops, they were working on the same platform. In that case, like for example, let's say Cloud Foundry, right, or Kubernetes. So similarly in this case, MLOps essentially is that field where the model developers used to create a model and throw it over the wall to other people to say, hey, go deploy this model, right? Figure out how to add a pre-processor, post-processor, how to add security to this particular model, etc., and how to scale it. But that's not expectation right now. Thou shall be able to develop, validate your models, right? Deploy it, if not exactly in production, in a production like staging, like setting, and see if the model are giving and working on real data, not giving biased predictions, not having drift, not having anomaly, right? So the expectation from a data scientist is much more, right? And then if the expectation is much more, they need tools and technologies, right? So the tools and technologies like Kubeflow help make data scientists go 5 steps further. So rather than just stopping at creating a model in Jupyter Notebook, now go 5 steps further, where you are able to deploy it in a staging like environment, run validation, configure some security. So that's the notion, right? So yes, as you saw, what happened with DevOps is what's happening with MLOps, right? Like a data scientist is not only expected to be a data scientist, and similarly, the people in the ops, they're not supposed to say that I don't know anything about this model, right? They're all coming and meeting in the middle, and Kubeflow provides that platform for both data scientists as well as the operation folks to come and work together on that single platform.
Fantastic. I think technical is over. The last one I will still throw one, and that is, does IBM think of investing something in this area in India? Because government of India has got a standard. They have produced something. I think October they released the new AI policy and all that. So, is there any opportunity for IBM to invest in this area in India? Are you looking at, or would you be
I'll
interested if you?
have to, I mean, I'm not aware of any explicit engagement. I definitely am aware of, there is parts of the team which are engaged in now, working through the European Union regulations coming in. I will have to go back and see, if something more formal has been um, initiated with India on that side, right? I think, as I said, like part of it is also driven by laws and regulations, like something like GDPR, which came out of Europe. It sort of mandated everyone to come together and work on it, right? It was no longer the requirement of individual or organizational initiatives. It was like, you got to do it. So I think if India is going into that zone where some certain regulations and laws actually come forward, that will really benefit. But I would love to see if you guys would can connect with people in India, or if there are officials or organizations which are involved, which are driving this particular space. I would love to get involved and work with them and take this forward. Yeah.
I will do that. Go ahead, Vipin.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Prakash. We all can agree that it was a very fruitful session. On behalf of the organizing team and Teaching Learning Center, Ramanujan College, University of Delhi, we extend our heartfelt thanks to you, Animesh, and for taking out time and interacting with our participants. We really hope to have more engagements with you in near future. And with this, thank you so much. Thank you, Animesh.
Thanks, and thanks for having me, Prakash and
Yeah,
Vipin. It was great, chatting with you guys around this. Like, and I would love to collaborate more with like-minded folks back in, in the academia in India and in general. Would be glad to participate in any more activities to advance the field of trusted AI.
We want to have you. Okay. Thank you very much. And I appreciate
Thanks a
your
lot.